Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come up to Kamloops and to be here with you today. It's a real pleasure for me to do that. And I think I just want to begin by thanking your president, Jim Eicher, and your vice presidents, Glenn Hansman and Terry Mooring, and everybody involved in the executive and your local teachers associations, because to state the obvious, it's been an incredibly tumultuous year for everybody involved in public education, particularly you. And I cherish the relationships that have been built between the NDP caucus and the BCTF, and I salute your organization, who have a number of particular and sometimes fussy public education stakeholders, and you work with them and find common ground with them, and it advances the agenda of all those who advocate in their own way for public education. So thank you to the BCTF for that. I also want to bring greetings from John Horgan. You invited him to your convention earlier this year. He really enjoyed being there. He's actually in Ireland right now, doing a route visit with his family there. He sent me a little note the other night. He said, looking around the Emerald Isle, Rob, can't find a magic pot of gold here called LNG. Have to tell Christy. But the sad part of what I've just said, actually, is that 2 years into this government's mandate, it actually describes their entire economic agenda for the province of British Columbia. We have a government that has put all of their economic eggs in one basket, neglecting the other 100% of GDP in this regionally and sectorally diverse economy of ours. And that's a bad strategy. In the near term, it's a disastrous strategy in the long term. And what is fundamentally missing, I think, and the case will be made in 2017, forcefully this time, I hope, by the NDP, what is fundamentally missing from their economic strategy, such as it is that there's no understanding about how education of our people, of our citizens, about social capital, is the key ingredient to a modern, innovative, and strong economy. It's not anywhere in the liberal vernacular or understanding. This should be obvious, in part because British Columbia's entire history is built around a strong investment in public education. We simply wouldn't be a province that has been able to sustain prosperity the way that we have without public education at the core of our investments that we make all as taxpayers and citizens. Just try and imagine what this province would look like if we didn't have a high-quality public education system. There'd be less wealth created, no middle class. Our competitiveness would decline. There'd be more crime in our cities. That's the lesson of history from other jurisdictions. And the lessons so far in this century are pretty clear as well. You can't be a creative, innovative economy with opportunities for everyone to do well without education, again, at the core of social and economic development. The OECD, I know they're the sort of testing organization and such, but the OECD, which is the collection of industrialized countries, in its 2012 report called Better Skills, Better Jobs, Better Lives, put it this way: without adequate investment in education, people languish on the margins of society, technological progress does not translate into an economic growth, and countries, or provinces, can no longer compete. In short, education is the global currency of 21st century economies. So now we come to the government's twin pillars of mismanagement of public education. An unbridled appetite on the one hand for confrontation, and an almost apathetic complacency on the other hand. I really hesitate to go back to talking about last summer to you folks because you looked so relaxed and tanned and really good. But for the purposes of my political rhetoric, I need to go back there, and we need to make sure that the voters of British Columbia's memories go back there too in 18 months. But it was 12 years ago, actually, that I was last in Kamloops. I was here a number of times that summer, but I was with John Horgan on the picket lines at the Kamloops-Thompson Teachers Association, local schools, local rallies. And we were sliding into chaos from this government's addiction to confrontation that summer. The silence last August was incredible as this crisis unfolded before everybody's eyes. Not a word, barely a tweet over the entire month could be heard from the Premier or her Education Minister that showed any interest to resume bargaining or any resolve to get our schools open. What should never have been allowed to happen, happened in British Columbia. And that's why we need a new government in British Columbia, so it never happens again. The tragedy of it was so completely unnecessary. There was massive public support for mediation and then arbitration that went completely unheeded. And British Columbia got dragged down into the longest school shutdown in our province's history. Because confrontation is what this government wanted. And that's what they brought. They spent their entire summer, I'm going to get off the summer in a second, but on a $40 voucher scheme. Remember? Instead of a settlement. So it felt like everything was actually going according to plan. That would be the plan that in 2012, the Supreme Court of BC actually found the government guilty of trying to provoke a strike, and they did it again in BC. So they won't change. This province needs to change. Let's not forget that when it was all over, though, that the most dangerous place for you to stand in British Columbia, by the way, is between Christy Clark and a television camera. You will be run over and flattened and hospitalized. But when it was all over, she took credit for the deal and accepted none of the responsibility for her government's utter failure. And poor Vince Reddy, the man of the hour, got airbrushed out of all the photographs. I mean, but despite all that, surprisingly, after your ratification vote, Christy Clark found the right words. And you'll probably remember them. She said it was time to heal in the school system. You know, it washed over pretty quickly, but I mean, just going back to last summer, I remember one of her best quotes, and it was sort of, you know, pre-Donald Trump. It was amazing, but she said that teachers were only in it for themselves. Unbelievable. Just when we needed calmness and statesmanship in trying to diffuse the situation. This year, school districts are the enemy in British Columbia. You get a little reprieve for a bit. They're accused out there, the 60 districts, of hoarding pallets of low-hanging fruit from Christy Clark's finance minister. Low-hanging fruit, where has Christy Clark been? Over 15 years, British Columbia has gone second in the country in per-pupil funding to 9th. From 2005 to 2010, the rest of the country hired 5% more teachers to give more individual attention and learning in their provinces to drive better results in their school systems. We declined by 2%. And government's own internal documents, Glenn FOI'd them, I FOI'd them, showed that the government knows that there's $192 million of unfunded cost pressures completely downloaded by the province onto the school districts. So where has Christy Clark been? Low-hanging fruit. She's been in charge, and that's the problem. Her latest fight 4 months ago in this post-calm period was Bill 11. A law with sweeping new centralized powers that we have no idea how the government will use, done without any consultation with your organization, without consulting elected school officials, parents, any of the other organizations involved in public education. The opposition bitterly opposed this bill because it guts elected school boards, gives the government power on any pretext to fire democratically elected representatives. And we opposed the bill because it stomped all over a commitment to work collaboratively with teachers on professional development. It's a pretty sad sight in the legislature when government MLAs won't even stand to debate their own legislation, and that's what happened in the Bill 11 debate. Nearly every liberal MLA sat on their hands in the House to speed Bill 11's passage. They refused to meet members of the public in their constituencies back home. And so that bill got through. We dragged it out as long as we could. We fought it. But it was done as it is. And yet the former Minister of Education, who rammed Bill 11 through, denies he's in a rush to change professional development for teachers. Well, I guess there's one change from last year. He is gone now, so Anyone from Metro Vancouver? Okay, your public transit infrastructure is just fine. He's going to clean up that mess, okay, for Christy Clark. It's called Scorched Earth, the sequel. So the question for every parent, every trustee, every teacher is this: how do you trust a government that behaves like this? In the space of 9 months, the government has broken all their key promises to the school system. They broke the promise to fully fund your contract. Instead, they passed a budget that cuts $55 million more from public education, and it's the same budget that found the space to give the top 2% of income earners a $230 million tax cut. That's what they did. They said they'd fix schools over and over and over again, going far back as Christy Clark as the education minister, that they would make all schools seismically safe by 2020. And tens of thousands of kids and thousands of your members are going back to teach in these schools. They broke that promise and they said on a cold Friday in February, oh, we'll do it by 2030. And Mr. Fassbender, I'll mention his name, he said to the media just months ago around the Bill 11 debacle, to the media and to your president, that he would work with the BCTF for two years to make sure we got it right on professional development. And then as soon as Bill 11 was passed into law, he denied that he had ever even made that commitment. Unbelievable. That one set a record for the fastest broken liberal promise. So now we're left to guess what government is going to do with the power to determine what teachers' professional development looks like. Perhaps they will continue to rely on local priorities identified by teachers to help find ways to improve learning for kids. That would be the best case scenario.
Are pigs flying?
Or perhaps this government will attempt to centralize professional development, to bundle it up and offer it for sale to the education corporations that roam this continent looking for market opportunities.
They can try.
There is always, and this is the danger of this government, there is always a privatization agenda at play with the BC Liberals, and that is why they can't be given any more time in office anymore in British Columbia. So let me just shift away from the government's bleak record. I think that's a good stroll down memory lane there, but there are many positive things that I want to reiterate. Hassan and Irene have talked about some of them. First, the federal election. 71% of Canadians want change from Stephen Harper. Now, they want change on a whole bunch of things. And this is good news for a whole bunch of reasons: for the environment, for civil liberties, for workers' rights. But I would ask you this, with this election opportunity before us: has there ever been a time in Canada, which is a laggard and an outlier in the OECD on the file of early childhood education, has there ever been a time where knocking on the door is an opportunity for Canada to take a massive leap forward for the social and well-being of its citizens, its generations to come, to have a strong universal child care system in this country. There has never been that opportunity, and it's one we all need to work so hard to take, because it will build a better country. $15 a day childcare would help families struggling with affordability in this province enormously. And you know, as professional teachers, that as an investment, early childhood education is probably the only thing that's going to be able to help us deal with the phenomena that we see every year, where 30%, according to teachers I talk to, of kids enrolling in kindergarten arrive not fully ready to learn. And that's a chance in life that goes against them from day one. And that's a strong reason why we need to take what Mr. Mulcair has on offer for our province. The second sign of political hope has been mentioned, and it's just over the Rockies. It's Premier Notley's government. They won a bold mandate just 4 months ago. And I want to remind you of what they've been able to do in just 100 days through a flurry of legislation, legitimate with the backing of the electorate, and interim funding bills. They haven't even introduced a full budget yet. But in 100 days, you ought to stack up what Christy Clark has done in 14 years in this province. New funds for education, for health care, advanced education, new laws banning big money from politics, progressive tax reforms that actually ask corporations and top income earners to take some responsibility and help tackle the Tories' deficit. A real commitment to lowering carbon emissions that cause climate change. That's what's going on in Alberta as of 4 months ago. And that's what we need to look ahead to in British Columbia once we elect Thomas Mulcair as the next Prime Minister of Canada and Bill Sundu as the next Member of Parliament for Kamloops. So we know that Christy Clark has done considerable damage, but these things are repairable. Nearly 9 in 10 kids in British Columbia and their families are involved in public education. The system, despite all its challenges, performs incredibly well. I know that as a parent of 2 who are both thriving in the public school in my community. It's the passion, it's the skill, it's the professionalism of your members. And I know that parents recognize that as well. A lot of them have been saying that to me just in the past couple of weeks, how much they value their teachers. Well, they usually say, actually, thank God summer is almost over, but it's sort of the same thing. The trust they put in you to do your job well. But thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to be here this morning. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all the best in your conference. And I really wish to leave you with one thing. We have an awful lot of work to do, those of me and my colleagues in the NDP caucus. John Horgan, our leader, as we get ready for the 2017 election. I really appreciate, as I mentioned, the work that we've been doing together with local teachers associations, with your executive. Let's strengthen that. Let's keep that going. We need your ideas. We need your help. And we need to work together so that we can defeat this reactionary government and bring in something new that people deserve in British Columbia. Thank you.